Welcome, everyone, once again to one of our expert talks today. We have Beyond Code Completion, Windsurf, and Human+Agent software development. I'm very excited about this. I have myself tried Windsurf for the last couple of weeks, so I already have some questions prepared for that. But before we get into the actual topic, I want to remind you how we do this call. As usual, we are recording the call already, and we will post it in the YouTube channel of the GenAI Gurus. If you have any question, feel absolutely welcome to use the either Q&A or the chat, and I will try to pass the questions if Rudy or Vanessa don't see them in context as soon as we get them. The GenAI Gurus, for those who don't know, is a community founded in June 2023. At the moment, we have almost 1,400 members in Meetup. And you see here on the right some of the most active members, basically the main organizers, Miguel Cienfuegos, myself, Carlos Hernández Vaquero. I work at Bosch as software development manager for data-centric software solutions. We have Gert Brusman, who is not there today, I believe. And I think even his title in this slide is wrong. I'm not sure, but anyway. And Rasmi, by the way, maybe you want to say a few words. Let me also promote you. Maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Rashmi. Almost for the past 1.5 years, I've been active with organizing events with the GenAI Gurus. I'm based out of Berlin, a data scientist and a machine learning engineer with the background. And that's also why I'm excited about knowing more about Windsurf. I have not used it for a couple of weeks, but I had downloaded. I'm curious to know more. So thanks. Over to you,
Very good.
Carlos.
Thank you, Rasmi. So we have some other community tools that I want to mention here. We, apart from the YouTube channel that already was mentioned, we have a website, we have a Discord server. We will at the end share the link to join if you want, and also a few GitHub repos. In the past couple of years, we had all kinds of talks. All of them are posted in the YouTube channel. We have people from Meta, from Microsoft, from several startups, so very cool stuff. And as always, we have a regular community call once per month. The next one is on May 19th at 6:30 p.m. German time. So feel welcome to join there if you want to exchange, get to know some people, do networking, and so on. And that's it for the introductory part. And now I will pass it to Rudy or Vanessa. I don't know who wants to take over. The stage is yours.
Perfect. I'll get us started here today. Super excited to be here. Really appreciate you all having us. Let me confirm. You should be seeing my slides popping up that say Beyond Code Completion.
Yes. Good.
Okay, perfect. Let's get this going. Okay, the goal, we kind of have a two-part presentation today. Of course, I'll introduce myself. I'm going to walk through a lot of our team's thought process on how we've approached building Windsurf and some of the principles that really guide us as we think about what the future of software engineering looks like. And then we'll pass the presentation over to Vanessa, who's going to take us into the Windsurf editor itself and walk through a few kind of what we would describe as like level 2 use cases for actually interacting with the tool. We certainly want this to be interactive. Feel free to put questions in the chat, as Carlos has mentioned. I'll be working on moderating that as well as he. Hopefully we have a lot of fun and you guys learn a little bit about how we approach building these types of technologies. By way of introduction, I'm Rudy Garza. I'm on our go-to-market team here at Windsurf. I'm based in Austin, Texas. It's really my responsibility to help large enterprises around the globe evaluate whether Windsurf is a right choice for their engineering teams. I'm joined by my colleague, Vanessa Salas, who I work really closely with. Vanessa is a deployed engineer here at Windsurf. She has a software development background, and she works alongside our go-to-market folks as kind of a technical counterpart, helping our customers and prospective customers kind of understand how to evaluate and use these tools as we kind of work through the process of partnership. Vanessa, do you want to say hello before I proceed?
Perfect. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me, Rudy?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Salas. Rudy mentioned, I'm a deployed engineer. I help customers throughout onboarding, training, get customers rolling from 0 to thousands of users, teach them about prompt engineering and pretty much how to use our tool the best. So excited to be here today.
Amazing. Let's do it. We kind of want to, as we start thinking about, what is our approach to building like an agentic IDE or the future of software development, we want to start off with a really high-level thesis. We believe that agents are the future of software development. If we take a trip down memory lane, thinking back to 2022, when people were still writing code maybe without AI at all, we had that first taste of magic, right? Copilots and the autocomplete modality. Our company, which was called Codium at the time, actually launched as one of the really early plugins that supported autocomplete modalities. But we always knew that the frontier models and the kind of concept of intelligence would get better. We would have larger models, more efficient training techniques, more kind of emergent capabilities that would support workflows that we couldn't even see or think of just a couple of years ago. In 2024, we really got a taste of the agents, which were supposed to be the next evolution of copilots, but they weren't quite good enough to autonomously execute tasks from end to end, right? Which brings us to today, where agents are kind of just getting good enough to be useful. So if agents are the future, like why are we building an IDE? This is a question that we get a lot. There's obviously a lot of amazing technology companies that all kind of have their own hypotheses on like what the right home for an agent should be or how it should work. First and foremost, here at Windsurf, we don't think that software developers are going away. We think that the future is humans and agents working together in harmony. Humans are focusing on what we do best, and then the agents handle the rest. In that future, we would need a new interface, a new medium entirely for humans and AI to actually collaborate on. We felt that an IDE was the best bet for this, kind of the most like sensible place, and hence the birth of the agentic IDE. You can think of it as a shared canvas between you and the AI. So what does this actually look like? Instead of playing this video, we'll spend time in the demonstration today. But this looks like a fork of VS Code, as many of you know, and so it's meant to feel familiar. But on the right side pane, you have access to our Cascade agent, which can do things for us like look up docs or search the web, grep through an entire code base, execute terminal commands, open files, and edit history as context, right? Generate commit messages for us, generate UIs from images that we upload into the agent, and so much more. And what's really fun is that this kind of capability set evolves every day. So if that's what it looks like, which I think is hopefully pretty easy to understand, more importantly to think about is like, what does this feel like? Our goal is that Windsurf feels like the feeling of flow, a singular state of focus where you're not encumbered by bad keystrokes, bugs, syntax errors, anything like that. You as an engineer can purely focus on creation or building, like kind of going back to like the dream of wanting to be a builder in the first place. And this is real and it's happening today. These are real results from real people that are using Cascade. And frankly, with the pace of our user growth, some of these stats are probably a little outdated at this point. But Cascade has autonomously written billions of lines of code at this point. And we're processing an unbelievable amount of user prompts into Cascade every single minute. When we think about like what we're doing here at Windsurf, we try to measure our impact in terms of like what's actually happening for the developers that are using our product. How many things out there are we supporting getting created? So with that brief introduction, I want to get into the principles of like what we think about as a company for building the agentic technology of tomorrow. Again, there's a lot of ways we can approach things. This is going to be our approach, and I really hope it's interesting. Let's start by framing up the problem. There's two key gaps today in human AI unity. Problem one is that we typically don't actually say or prompt exactly what we mean, right? AI systems need to be really, really good at inferring what we mean whenever we send it a message. The second problem is that the models actually have to be good enough to execute on our vision. They have to like infer what we mean, and then they have to take that and then go and do something with it. This is really challenging, right? And so if we're thinking about how do we build agents, which hopefully do a ton of autonomous work for us, that are built off of these models where there's some problems involved, the opportunity for a company like Windsurf is that if we're going to be a successful company at building agents, they need really minimal input. The agents should learn our style of work. They should predict our next steps, handle background research completely on their own, and infer or determine the user's intent, which keeps the effort level of the user low and increases the output and quality of the code or of the product itself. So that leads us to our first principle, trajectories. Full stop at Windsurf, we try to read the developer's mind. Unlike some other plugins or editors, our agent is really deeply integrated with the IDE itself and what the user is actually doing in that IDE. This enables a couple of things, right? One piece of it is that we really want Windsurf to understand what it is that you're doing to the best of its ability. And the other piece is that we also want to be able to give Cascade and its tools the ability to do what you would do, how you might do them, right? This has kind of led to features that now, a few months into this journey, feel really commonplace, like a user being able to tell our agent to just continue my work, or our turbo mode, which allows us to automatically execute terminal commands, right, for any queries that the Frontier model deems safe. We'll talk about the example of like what it looks like to continue my work, but in the concept of kind of working with the Cascade agent, if the model gets stuck, or if we take one task, right, like edit one type of syntax in a particular function, maybe we just ask Cascade to simply like continue that. And throughout the rest of the relevant files, whether it's just that one or it's several, we would actually go through and make the same types of changes. When we think about like a shared trajectory, right, or the concept of intent, we're thinking about the idea that the human and the agent are working together and doing tasks that each of them are individually good at, which ultimately brings us to a much more effective method of software engineering. Developers are here to stay, again, and if you want to work seamlessly with them, the agent needs to understand what they're thinking, right? Like Windsurf should be ubiquitous. Over time, as we look to the future of like what trajectories or our approach to intent looks like, our hypothesis is that the agent will be reading more and more of your mind, and maybe do things that you didn't even know how to do yourself, right? Like write its own unit tests before you even finish completing a function. Or performing code-based wide refactors before you even finish renaming a function. That probably sounds a little crazy today, but I think you guys are going to be really excited to see the kinds of things that we're working on internally and that we hope to release in the coming months and years. Second principle, meta learning. Even if Windsurf understands what you're doing in the moment, there is an inferred understanding of your code base, your preferences, and your organizational guidelines that more senior engineers have developed over the years. We call this meta learning, right? So in our process, Windsurf has to actually adapt and remember things about you. If you think about the frontier models, they are very, very smart engineers who've not had exposure to how you or your company specifically writes code. And so what does this mean for us, right? We've built something that we call memories. Cascade, our agent, actually generates its own memories completely on its own. Or the user can actually prompt Cascade to remember something as well, like, hey, remember that I use Tailwind v4, right, as a general practice. We support custom tooling via MCP servers, so it can adapt to your own custom workflows or some of the solutions that you use internally within your organization. We can whitelist or blacklist terminal commands, so you can tell Cascade, like, always run Git without my confirmation needed, right? Lost my screen there. Future of how we approach the idea of memories and rules. The dream is that these types of things, right, these preferences or these patterns would actually be entirely inferred by the agent based on your unique code base or your usage of the Windsurf editor. Auto-generated memories are just a step in this direction today. Right now, a lot of folks talk to us about rules files. Having to actually write out a rules file is today kind of a crutch, right? It's a necessity. It helps in the short term, but in the long term, we believe that agents will continue to build up such a significant memory bank of things that are unique to you as an individual developer and your organization, that every Windsurf agent would be personalized to both the user and the company. Our third and final principle is scaling with intelligence, right? Now that Windsurf understands what we're doing in the moment and can actually improve its performance over time, how do we build an agent that scales with intelligence and capability? And we're trying to give you the best tool that we can today, but the AI landscape is really rapidly improving. We always have to be thinking about how to have the best product or the best version of Windsurf 3 months, 6 months, or a year out from now. If we think back to 2021, when ChatGPT first came out, our imaginations started to run wild, right? Like, we knew that work and the idea of working would fundamentally change forever. But back then, the models were a little too dumb for what we wanted to do with them. So we built a lot of infrastructure to compensate for some of their weaknesses, right? We're embedding indices, we're working on retrieval heuristics, output validating systems, and that was really, really helpful for squeezing performance on the margins. But they were local maximums based on a fixed notion of model intelligence. As everyone here in this meeting knows, models have been improving at a rapidly accelerating rate. Going forward, we believe that the dominant strategy is to build systems that implicitly assume the models are going to get better and not waste time building scaffolding to solve for particular edge cases. At Windsurf, from a long-term perspective, we need to build the right tools and interfaces that become even more useful organically as the models get smarter. For example, app mentions. We built them because chatbots have kind of bad context, right? Today, Windsurf can dynamically infer relationships between bits of code and retrieve what it needs. Over 90% of the time, our users don't need to explicitly specify that you want to do something like search the web or use the code base as context or read a certain piece of documentation. @file and @web are helpful at the margin, and we could probably, grab some basis points here. But we believe that as LLMs improve, these types of workflows will actually become obsolete. As a pretty lean engineering team, we'd rather invest in where the puck is headed. And so when you build these crutches, we're actually hard coding rules for what the system should look at before responding. We believe it should always consider looking at these things, but LLMs are smart enough to know what tools they need. In the future, we shouldn't have to choose between chat, agent mode, yes or no web search, etc. We believe that agentic tool use is the future, and this allows our product to scale really naturally with intelligence. It will always perform to its highest potential based on the models that are available for our use. So how do we build for the future of this, right? We know that as a fact, models are going to get better and faster. Here at Windsurf, when we think about our approach to building agents, we're building agents that can do unsupervised work, generate full PRs, consume complex documents, implement Figma designs, right? Even from a screenshot. Windsurf is architected from the ground up to actually inherit these gains from the models as they improve. And if it doesn't, rest assured, we're going to rebuild from the ground up around what gives our users the most powerful product. So as a recap, if we're thinking about how
Rudy,
we approach...
Sorry to interrupt you. There is one question before it gets too late. In the Q&A, it says, what's your plan with pre-built memory banks? I try to build my own based on Windsurf rules on various sources, but not sure if this breaks something in the future inside my local Windsurf instance.
Interesting question. Vanessa, what do you think? Pre-built memory banks?
I had my mic off this whole time.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, great question. So it's actually something that is going to be released very, very soon. This pre-built memory bank, we call it, oh man, I forgot what it's called already because it's being released this wave, but it's pretty much information that's not just coming from your repository anymore, right? That could be Google Docs, that can be Jira tickets and so forth, where we actually own that connection now, not through MCP servers, but something that we hold and store on our end. Of course, as a company, we are very privacy aware and want to build out the solution that's the most secure. And the reason why we were hesitant on features like this is because it does consider storage, right? Right now, our solution Windsurf holds a vector database that's stored on your local machine. Very different to our competitors where they vectorize your data and then send it elsewhere, right? So all these features we think about security first, but it is a feature that's coming, right? Hope that answered your question.
I think another way of answering would be, I think that you're going to be really excited about what we're releasing this week.
Yeah.
That sounds really great. And thank you, Matthias, for the question. There's one more question just popped up. What is your position and thoughts on the term vibe coding?
Yeah, great question as well. As a company, I think we focus a lot on our enterprise users, and we're always security conscious, and that's because we have a lot of enterprise customers. And when we do build out features, we want to make sure we are hitting our enterprise customers. Vibe coding is great, if you're learning how to code, if you're starting from 0 to 1 and so forth. But many of the times, and many of our customers are working with these large repositories that are building, maybe adding a new feature or doing a migration, so forth, where there's already code in place and you're just, modifying it and making it better. So while vibe coding is awesome, it's not, our focus as a company is to provide tools that are accessible to everybody.
Cool, thank you. There's one more somehow related question. Do you think Windsurf is something that will be able to handle parts or even a complete system or software development lifecycle for product development? So what is the scope? I think you mentioned it a little bit before, Rudy.
Yeah, I certainly think that our attitude is like today that we understand there's limitations, right? I think that as the models get better and faster, our posture as an organization is that we're going to be able to help our users address more and more of the software development lifecycle. Right now, we're really acutely focused on implementing code, as many of you are well aware of. I think as the models give us a little bit more freedom and flexibility to build outside of code implementation, that there's a lot of opportunity for us to go and address. So, there's no confirmed plans for anything, but don't be surprised if, years down the road, that's a reality we build into.
Very cool. Thank you, Rudy, and also Francisco for the questions. Please keep throwing questions. We will address those points.
Yeah, we can get here into the technology. I think to land the plane, and hopefully this was interesting, but as a recap of our approach, right? For this to work in the long term, and for us to get the full benefits of the future improvements of the frontier models and deliver those to our users, one, Windsurf has to read our users' minds. Two, Windsurf has to be personalized to both our users and to their organizations or the code bases within that organization, right? And three, this all has to scale as intelligence does. We have to be agentic to our core. We cannot compromise on hard coding short-term wins. We always have to ensure that we're architected to get the most out of the models as they exist. So to kind of leave you all with some ideas of like where we're going, right? Kind of start thinking about AI generated PRs completely end to end. Maybe the idea of fixing bugs before you even find them, executing unit tests in sandboxes, and the idea of maybe the rules file going away, right? 99% or more of your preferences will be inferred or learned in the future. We're already seeing a little bit of each of these today, but you can rest assured that this is going to get better and better and better as we go. Thanks so much for having us, y'all. I think if you're interested in like the kind of data that we look at, right, the way that we're looking out at the world and the future of software engineering right now is that Windsurf is writing a significant percentage of our users' code across our entire user base, which does include individuals, right? It's over 90%. And at many organizations that we work with, we have over 1,000 enterprise customers. That number is extremely significant. In some cases, northward of 75 or even 80%. So many folks are switching over to us to experience the magic, and we certainly hope that you do too. But with that, I will turn it over to Vanessa to take us into the product and start talking about some use cases and how this all actually works.
Perfect. Before I do, any other questions we want to hit on before I start my demo here?
I have a few questions, but maybe I leave them for the end in case you answer them while you explain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Perfect. All right. So one of the use cases, of course, there's many different use cases of how you can use Cascade and Windsurf, depending on type of engineer you are. I think I heard we have some data engineers here. We have some machine learning engineers. We could have front end, back end, so forth. I'm going to work on a migration plan just because it covers a bit more of the features that I want to show today. But of course, don't focus so much on the language I'm using or what I'm exactly doing. Think about it more so high level steps and how I'm prompting the model to get the best results. So first thing first, I have this model folder here and I have a new model folder. And I want to work on migrating all of my code from using old model to new model. So very common schema migration. But before I do all of that, I'm going to first ask the model some questions to get its understanding of this repository, right? Because just like myself, it's new to it. So the first thing I'm going to ask it is, what is the difference between @model and @new model? Right. And what it's going to do underneath the hood, it's, sorry, I didn't prompt that correctly. Gave it the wrong folder. Between model and @new model. Oops, there we go. All right. What it's going to do underneath the hood is it's going to actually scan those files, take a look at those chunks, and every single chunk of code, it's going to say, it's going to ask itself a question. Is this chunk of code relevant to the question at hand? Yes or no? So Cascade is not actually doing a vector search underneath the hood. It's actually looking at your raw code. Something that's very different that we actually do as a company, and Rudy hit on this, is that we actually are taking a look at the raw code to be able to grab the most relevant information. So that's why, like, regardless of how larger your code base gets or how complex things get, we make sure that we're able to find that relevant context. So you see here, okay, it gave us some information on the architecture approach of the old model and the new model, that file structure, some of the common files between the two. And then here are some more key architecture differences. Okay, so now that the model understands, okay, what are some of those differences here? I'm going to say the entire code base uses at model. Perfect. There. Create a migration plan to migrate my code to use at the new model. Right? Why am I doing this? Why can't I just start going in and actually editing those files, just tell it, hey, migrate all of my code from that old model to the new model? The reason why is I'm actually building this knowledge for the model, right? I first made sure it understood, okay, what are the differences between the two folders? Once I see, all right, it understands high level those differences, then I'm going to ask it, okay, create this migration plan for me. Why? Well, just like as you would as a developer, you're not going to go in and, once you have a ticket, you get a JIRA ticket, you're not going to go in and right away start making changes. You first probably have a plan, and then you go through that plan with senior developer or your manager, and they say, okay, this looks fine, I like your approach, and then you take the next step. You want to do the same thing with Cascade, and Cascade is there to help you do those similar steps. So we see we have a migration plan now. I'm actually going to have it save this migration plan. Save this migration plan in a markdown file. And the reason why, again, we're saving this plan is because maybe I start, on this project on Monday, and, Tuesday I'm working on something else, and I come back to it Wednesday, Thursday, so forth. That conversation history, not only is it, older now, and the model, has done other tasks and worked on other things, it doesn't have anything to remember, hey, what have I already done? What are the steps from this migration plan? Where are we at now? So forth. But if you give it a plan, if you create a plan together, now at any point in time, I can go back and reference that plan. I can say, hey, we've done steps 1 and 2. Now we're on steps 3, and so forth. So it's pretty much giving the model a baseline to work around, regardless of where you're at. All right, so now we can go ahead and take a look at this migration plan. This looks pretty good to me, but one thing about these models is that don't always accept the first thing it gives you. Most of the time, honestly, models will get you 60 to 70% of the way there the first time around. As a developer, it's your responsibility to go ahead and probe the model, ask it for more details. For example, I can make this migration plan more verbose. I could tell it to explain any one of the phases with greater detail. Or, for example, if you're ever creating unit tests, it'll probably get you, again, 60 to 70% of the way there. But I guarantee you, if you ask it, hey, did you consider any edge cases? It will go ahead and consider those edge cases, think twice and add more tests in. So remember, don't go ahead and just accept everything for granted. Make sure you're digging deeper with the model. And that's what I'm going to do here, right? So I think we have phase 3 is the service layer migration. Phase 4 is the domain model migration. And then phase 5 is the test coverage. Okay, well, it gives me pretty good information. Okay, create new tests for straight transitions, update existing tests, and so forth. But I want more details into this phase 5 to really understand, okay, what tests are we changing and why? So I can go ahead, I'll accept these changes, but I wanted to go one level deeper. Can you add more detailed information for phase 5 test coverage and state exactly which tests need to be updated and why? Right? Again, just as you would as an engineer understanding, okay, why exactly do we have to update this test? What is it? What's changing now? You want to make sure you're getting that same information from the model. If you don't understand anything, ask it. Ask it why you made those changes. ask it why it considered that plan, and so forth. Any questions so far?
Yeah, just wanted to interrupt Vanessa. There is one question about the capability of the system to do comparisons between different branches or versions across repositories in version control systems.
Yeah, great question. So the simple answer to that is we are actively working to release a tool called reviews to be able to do those reviews. We do not, as of today, I don't have anything to show for that, but that is coming up on our wave that's being released this week. So as a company, we are consistently releasing new features, and any feature that we hear from our enterprises and our users that are in high demand, we make sure that we reach them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was one more question related to the capability also to allow some kind of autonomous agent operation to continuous maybe monitor that the dependencies are up to date without security issues and who knows what.
Yeah. So for continuous monitoring and task management and so forth, right now we're not there yet, and we get this question a lot, and we are working towards that. But for example, this migration plan, if I go ahead and tell it, okay, start on step 1 and so forth, I want to then tell it, okay, go ahead and update that migration plan, show me what you've already done, so forth. Or if we have a list of requirements and something changes, right? I have to go ahead and ask Cascade, hey, do we need to update the requirements? So things like that, there's no consistent checking of your files to make sure we're updating anything. You could add it in your Windsurf settings under roles and add it under your workspace roles, say update at the migration plan.md every time another step of the migration has been completed to show the progress. Right? Same thing here. Review for example, if you had a requirements file, right? Requirements.txt file. Every time a new module or library is imported to keep it up to date. But again, this will only be considered whenever you ask Cascade a question or prompt it. Otherwise, we're not necessarily taking a look at Windsurf rules in the back. So it's not a process that's being ran. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe a potential workaround is in case you offer an API or a CLI, something interface that can be automated with a cron job every few minutes, checked for this and that. Is there something like that?
Yeah, currently, no, there's no automation there's no API access. We're really focused on the developer in the IDE experience. In the future, I don't see that off the table, meaning, it could definitely come. It's just our focus right now is keeping the developer in their flow state within the IDE.
Yeah, all right, makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a question about the current limits on the size of the code repository and like how good is Windsurf with large legacy code bases. Obviously, we work with a large number of enterprises, and this is like a huge topic of discussion across our entire user base, individual all the way up to the largest companies in the world. I definitely think like A, how good is it? And then B, like how do we help large enterprises actually learn how to work with the agent on their large code bases?
Yeah, great question. So large code bases in general, again, the problem here is not the models. The models, we offer any sort of model that comes out that has, good reputation, good reasoning, so forth, whatnot. And as a developer, you can go in and pick and choose which model you would like to use, right? So again, the model is just a commodity. The hard problem here is exactly what you guys mentioned. How do we get information from these very large code bases? Again, because our secret sauce really is our infrastructure layer. before we started off as Codium and then Windsurf, we were an infrastructure company that was focused on making sure we get the largest throughput from our GPUs. So what that now looks like is whenever we're taking a look at, okay, how to create that context window for these LLMs, we're looking at raw code, not vector embeddings, not a vectorized form of your code, but the actual raw code. So if it's legacy code, although these open source models may not have as much, code out in the world for them, we're able to find as much relevant information that we think to be able to pass that on as information, as context to these LLMs. So of course, these models perform better with Python, with Java, with JavaScript, so forth. That's, not to say that. I think that's pretty obvious. However, the next step is, okay, then how do we make sure it performs well with legacy code, maybe COBOL and so forth, like our companies are using, right? And that's really where that grabbing that information from your repository really is important. So how do we scale? I could stand here and say, I think we do a pretty good job at scaling, but I think it really comes from the level of enterprise customers that we have and the number of repositories that they're dealing with and the scale.
I think maybe a follow-up question just from me for the group, if I may, is how do we guide users to work with the agent in terms of a larger code base? I think the example that you've given here about generating a plan first is a really good first step there. But I guess what changes whenever we're working on a huge repo versus building a 0-to-1 app?
Yeah, exactly. So what changes? Things like Windsurf rules, things like the migration plans, things like a schema, a diagram schema, all of that now is going to be relevant to the model, right? Because we need to find some focus as to what the model should focus on, right? We don't need to, maybe, if we're implementing a new feature, we're not necessarily looking at the entire repository. We're maybe looking at a specific directory within that repository and understanding the dependencies. If you build out a dependency graph from the beginning, then the model understands, hey, if I'm hitting this file, these are the dependencies, and this is all the other files that are relevant. I don't need to scan the entire repository. I just need to scan these dependencies. So again, that repository architecture diagram would be really helpful, and we'll see an example of that. Any other questions?
There is one question about some people having trouble, and I including myself, working with .git ignore files. So it seems that Windsurf struggles with that sometimes. It doesn't find the file for me. In the past, at least, it didn't find it from time to time, or editing the file, it often says, I cannot find the file. Okay.
Yeah, so anything in your git ignore file will also be ignored by Windsurf.
Excluding the git ignore file, I hope.
Sorry. So the git, okay, so you want to be able to modify the git ignore file. Is that the question?
Right.
Okay, got it. I'll have to come back to that. I'm not sure if we modify the git ignore file, but everything obviously inside of the git ignore file is also ignored by the model.
Okay. Yeah, the question was also in general, I read it again. So it seems that some people are having trouble with the folders you specify here are sometimes maybe ignored or something by the cascade.
Yeah, I think the question is Vanessa, the git ignore file is not being seen by Cascade at all. Is there a situation where maybe maybe that could just be a bug, or is it Cascade has become unintentionally unaware of the file existing in the first place?
Got it. Okay. I'll have to come back and check that because I'm not sure what the expected behavior should be. From my understanding, obviously, we don't take a look at any of the files within git ignore. However, I'm not sure if we are able to modify / view the git ignore file to begin with.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It sounds like the behavior is not ideal.
Yeah.
Determining if it's a bug or if there's like something that tripped up the agent itself is something we'd have to go and diagnose kind of on one by one.
Yeah. Also, we do have a .windsurf ignore file. So if there's ever anything that you want Windsurf to ignore, but not, obviously not it still get checked into your repository, you can add that to .windsurf ignore. And it has the same formatting as .git ignore. Alrighty. So you see here, now when I asked it for more details in the plan, it goes in and specifically says, okay, why we have to change it and what are those changes. So for me, before I actually go in and do any of the code changes, I actually want to change the tests. Just some users like to change the code first. If you're more focused on test-driven development, you want to make sure that your tests are up to date before you're making any code changes. So I'm going to ask it to begin the migration on phase 5, part 1. Oops. Phase 5, part 1, book model test. Make sure to update the migration plan when the step is completed. So forth. Also, one thing to note here, it understands other files that I've modified. So for example, right here, it says, hey, you modified this file. And that's just providing any other additional information to this conversation that may be relevant. We call this trajectory understanding. So, hey, if I went in and modified this Windsurf rules, how does this affect now this conversation? Obviously, it adds some information as to what I expect from the migration plan whenever we complete a step, but I still gave it that information in the window as well. Let's take a look at here. All right. So now we see that these tests are now using our new model. We can go in and accept all of these changes or reject the changes. I usually suggest if most of the code is correct, however, there's some that's, incorrect, accept the changes and then highlight the code that's incorrect and then bring it back to the chat window. And the reason why it's an easier flow than rejecting it all and then having to go back in and prompt it differently for just a small change. All right, so I can go ahead, accept these changes, taking a look at the different files. Looked like it needed to replace these files. I can accept each one here, but I'm going to go ahead and press accept changes down below, so forth. And now you see here, it went ahead and updated the migration plan as I asked it to and added check marks. So again, if I come back to this later down in the week, it now understands exactly what I've updated. And I'll go ahead and ask it, hey, reference this migration plan to understand, what's been completed and what hasn't. Then it asks me, would I like to continue? Any questions so far?
One question about how to manage the complete flow. So there is the option to create new chat sessions, let's call it that way. And personally, I have been using the global rules to specify which files the LLM should look into to get the context it needs, so that I don't need to say every time, please go to this file to read and this file to read. So what is your recommendation how to manage this chat session? Should we have one chat session per feature, or what is the best approach?
Yeah, great question. So these conversations, as it continues to grow, everything, from the beginning is, think about it as it's getting summarized and passed in again as context, right? So if you have a conversation that spans the entire day, pretty much everything from the beginning is now summarized so much that detail is no longer saved, right? That's why things like these migration plans, markdown files, repository diagrams is really important, because it pretty much allows you to give it that information again and make sure it's fresh in the memory of the LLM. So if you are building a new feature, if you're, starting on a new task, whatever that is, anything that's no longer relevant, go ahead and start that new conversation. Even if I go, if Wednesday comes around and I'm working on this migration plan again, I'm not going to try to find this conversation, because what I did before was already great. I already made the changes I needed to. I understood that, so forth. I have a migration plan to reference it. I'm just going to start a new conversation and say, take a look at the migration plan. I want to continue it on step on phase 5. Oops, phase 5. And then, oops. Oh, this is just saying, like, do I want to bring it to chat? So, and then I actually can just bring that information in. So this is what I would do if, I start this new conversation again later down the lane. Any new feature, again, it doesn't need all of that context from a previous conversation. So feel free to use, Cascade to reference a plan. Make sure.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Maybe one feature suggestion is when the conversation gets very long. I don't know when it is too long. So it would be great if Windsurf would tell me, maybe you want to start a new discussion because you have, I don't know how many millions of tokens or whatever.
Yeah. Great question. One like temperature check that I do is that if it's ever not remembering any previous part of the conversation anymore that I still find relevant, go ahead and start that new conversation and give it that information again. Or if the code that it's generating is no longer using context that you've previously told it to, go ahead and start that new conversation. Pretty much when you see a degraded experience in your chat, it's a good practice to just start that new conversation.
Okay, thank you.
So last thing I want to show here is how, we talked about a migration plan, but also just understanding high level your code and how data flows, right? I have my plugin installed, Markdown Preview. Again, I'm going to start a new conversation here, and I'm going to ask it to generate a repo architecture diagram using Mermaid plugin to show data flow using the new model, using at new model. All right. Why is this important? Again, because now you give Cascade that high-level understanding of all the different components and features in your repository and how they interact with each other. So if I was going to go in and add a new feature to, my library class, maybe I'm adding, I don't know, instead of just being able to check out books, you add the ability to check out computers now as well to your library. How does that change this library state diagram? All right. Now we see here we have our mermaid diagram and so forth. So if I go ahead, accept these changes, that looks good. Now I should be able to press Command Shift View. Oh, let me see. Parse error. I'm actually going to Command copy that error here and paste it here. This error when trying to preview. Again, Cascade can be used for a variety of different things. Debugging, of course, is one of them. If you were ever to, run a test in your terminal and you have these logs within the terminal, Cascade has its own terminal window, so anything that's ran within the Cascade terminal window can be used as context. All right. Let's see what it fixed. Separating the state diagram, each diagram how it's known, fixing the syntax for the class. Okay, so let's go ahead and accept all those changes. Let's see if I can show this one. Okay, perfect. Not as I expected it, but it does preview now. I expected more so a diagram. Let me see. And I can tell with that.
Yeah, I don't know with Mermaid, but at least with Plant UML, I had to install an extension to render the code.
Okay, yeah, with Mermaid, you don't need to install an extension, but I could have just prompted differently this time around and so forth. Okay. Anywho, while this runs, any other questions? I know we're running close here on time.
Yeah, maybe one related to. Yeah, please go ahead, Rudy.
I was going to say from Frederick, how good is Windsurf at creating documentation from code right now? Could it generate, for example, a rough outline for an ARC42 documentation, or is it more focused on code?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, documentation is a pretty simple use case because it's just understanding and reading that code and creating documentation for it. I didn't cover that just because it's pretty standard, but it should be able to generate those documentation for you, whether that's in the code or creating its own separate file, creating a README, for example. Yeah, it's able to cover all of those bases. Any other questions?
Maybe two quite short from
my
side. Do you have any recommendation about which MCP servers are really useful? I know, for example, I use a lot Context7 to provide latest documentation of the dependencies I'm using, but maybe you have like I don't know, a list or something.
Yeah, we don't necessarily say these are very helpful. However, we do see from our enterprises a lot of users using Figma, using Jira and Confluence MCP servers, using Google Drive MCP server and so forth. And that's just because it's like standard information as to where relevant context is stored. So as a developer, if you're adding a new feature, of course, there's some Jira, Confluence, some type of ticket where all of that information is stored, right, of what needs to change. So we see our developers using that a lot to grab that information. Or, I have a company that I work with, and they do all the technical documentation. So they use their MCP server to grab information from their API specs and update all of their documentation.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. And I know we can select the LLM, and there is a list. I hope it stays like that after the recent news from OpenAI. But do you have like a recommendation which LLM to pick for which concrete use case? Like more for reasoning, for I don't know, what is a good use case maybe for a reasoning model versus a non-reasoning model?
Yeah, great question there. At the end of the day, we work really hard to be able to grab that context to send to these models. So if there's ever a model that you think, performs, worse than others, feel free to modify that. I personally tend to use Claude 3.5 or 3.7. 3.7 Sana is very good at going from 0 to 1 apps. If you ever use our feature of images and just like add an image of a website, it will do a pretty good job at replicating that website with 3.7. 4.1 is also very good at like documentation and reasoning in that sense. But I don't have any recommendations of like, hey, when you're doing this, use this model versus when you're doing another thing. It's more so trial and error from our developers. We could of course like say like how much we see usage of other models, but that's kind of just a usage metric, not necessarily like when is it good for one thing versus the other.
Yeah, I think the ways that we measure it too are maybe more nuanced than the typical user is like actually experiencing. Like, for example, when some of the more recent like OpenAI models came out, a lot of our benchmarking and experimentation like from our engineering team was more around like the speed of cascade conversations or like the speed of reasoning, like how it actually affects the experience of working with Cascade. A little bit less of like how easily does this particular model like take my prompt and output exactly what I want, which I think is typically what the users are asking us for. So it gets a little granular, but I do think, like to your point, it would probably be good to start posting some more of that research and like share like what we do see, and maybe let like the users decide for themselves what they want to do with that.
Yeah. And what Rudy was mentioning there is like whenever we do add new models, things like, does the model understand when to run a terminal command? Does it understand when to edit the file? Does it understand when to create a new file? Like all of those things are important that models aren't necessary. It's not like as developer, it's not necessarily what you're considering, but as a tool, we need to make sure that the model can do that. Yeah.
All right. Actually, we will need to close now because the time is over. But there was one question in the Q&A which was more or less like the star question. I left for the very end, and I'm not sure how much you can comment on that, but there are some information of plans of OpenAI to acquire Windsurf. I don't know if what you know or what you don't know. And the concrete question is if there is any change that the users may expect out of this.
Yeah, Vanessa and I probably know about as much as you all do, transparently. But as you all would imagine, there's always a ton of interest in Windsurf and us as a company, what we're building, right? So these kinds of conversations do probably happen all the time amongst our leadership, I'm sure. We can't formally comment on OpenAI or anything of that sort or what's expected for users, but I would imagine that our leaders' posture is that we're going to continue building the best imaginable environment for developers to kind of see the future of software engineering come true.
Right, makes sense, and very exciting to hear this and to live this these days. We will close for today with one last mention to the means we use, the media we use. So you can subscribe to the YouTube channel to see the recording of this call. In a few days, we will upload it. You know, the Meetup, LinkedIn, Discord as well. And with this, we will close for today. Vanessa, Rudy, it was really great to have you with us. Thank you so much for sharing the time with us. And yeah, have a good day. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, great. Thank you all.